You guys, welcome to this special bonus episode of Homeschool Conversations. Today, I am joined by my friend Holly Geiger Lee. She is one of my online friends who is also an in real life friend. So it's just really a delight to get to chat with Holly today, as her new book has just come out. But before I get to that, I'll introduce you to Holly. So, Holly lives in her home of North Carolina, where she has worked in the fields of both education and counseling. She's a homeschooling mother to three and wife to Andrew, and she loves to read with her children, participate in family games, and take dance lessons with her husband. Holly's work at mylittlebrookSchoolhouse.com connects parents and children with living books. Holly, I'm really delighted to have you here today. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and your background with education and homeschooling.
Oh, Amy, thank you so much for having me. This is such an honor. I just wanted to say thank you for having me. Um, so background in education, I grew up a public school kid, as many people in my generation uh, have. And I just, from the very beginning, my first love was teaching. So I was that kid that would teach her stuffed animals. And in high school, I always had some kind of extracurricular that dealt with either teaching or like mentoring or doing something in that capacity. So it really didn't come as a surprise for me to go to college and earn a bachelor's degree in elementary education. And I taught in the public schools here in North Carolina for 4 years. And I took a lot of life lessons with me from that. But in 2012, my husband and Andrew and I moved to our current town. And it was a new start. It was a small town at the time. It's now growing. And it wasn't until 2017 or so that I really started seriously considering homeschooling. My husband was homeschooled. He's one of 7 children, and it seemed like a natural choice. But at the same time, I had to come to that myself. And so to be able to make that decision, I wasn't sure 100%, but after just consulting and praying and just talking to my husband, we decided that it would be a good thing to try. And so at the beginning of, I think it was 2018. That's when we were seriously on board with homeschooling. And I read a lot of books back then. I read The Well-Trained Mind, as I'm sure a lot of your listeners have read, by Susan Wise Bauer and Jesse Wise. And I got a feeling for what classical education looked like, because I don't know about you guys, but I had to take some kind of an inventory to see what was my homeschooling style. So I did. And I scored pretty high in Charlotte Mason and classical and unit study methods, if you will. So I started homeschooling. But really, when people ask me, and when they ask me to this day, like, why do you homeschool? My main motivation would be, I want to be with my kids. I just want to spend time with my kids. And that's what I told people then, and that's what I would still tell people now. So here we are. It's been a whirlwind. We're in our 7th year, about to start our 7th year of homeschooling. And you know, it's been something that has been different almost every year, because we've had little kids and now we have middle-aged kids going into like kindergarten and 2nd grade, and I have a 5th grader, and we are just really excited about starting this year, because I actually discovered a university model school where our 3 will attend 2 days a week, and then the remaining 3 days they'll be with me at home. And I think it's just going to be a really great balance for our family, and I'm looking forward to that. So in our homeschool, we've tried a lot of different things, but I have so many wonderful memories of, I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate, like tea time, nature study, field trips. We're part of a small co-op, and we've participated in classical conversations before. And it's just been a real, it's just been a variety of things, but it's a rich life. We've loved it. And we've loved, morning time, Bible reading and hymn study, picture study, Writing and rhetoric. We've outsourced a little bit here and there. Like my son has a math tutor now, and it's great. It's been such a help to us. So I believe, homeschooling can look different for different people, but I also believe that homeschooling is kind of like a journey for the mom and as well. And so I have really enjoyed reading Cindy Rollins' Beyond Mere Motherhood about self-education. And I went down to Georgia 3 summers in a row when I was learning more about the Charlotte Mason method. And I loved going to the Charlotte Mason Together retreat down there in the Atlanta area. That was such a rich experience. And I even made a couple friends there and still keep up with them occasionally. So I feel like homeschooling is a journey for the whole family, mom included, of course. So it's been good.
I love to hear that story so much. I knew parts of that, but I love how you talked about what you've really come to see, like this why of homeschooling is about being with your children, this relationship you have with them. And sometimes, especially new homeschoolers, can get really overwhelmed and kind of fixated on, I've got to pick the perfect curriculum. I've got to pick the perfect homeschool philosophy, this, that, and the other, all the extra details that are an important part. They're a real part, obviously, of our home education journey. But it's good for us to keep like what you were saying in mind, that at the end of the day, it's about this time we're spending with our children. It's about those relationships, those real people, those image bearers. And also it's about the work God's doing in our lives as moms too. And if we can keep kind of that big picture in mind, maybe it'll help us not be quite so stressed about all the other details.
Yes, yes. Keeping the big picture and the things that matter in view, I think that's good.
Yeah. Well, I know one of the things you really focus on with your children and as you're talking to parents online is connecting people to living books. So, can you explain a little bit about what you mean by living books? I think this is one of those terms that just gets thrown around willy-nilly, and people maybe are afraid to ask what it means, or maybe they have certain assumptions when they hear that term. So, explain a little bit about what you mean by that term and why you think living books are a valuable part of our children's education.
Well, the term living book, I think, comes from Charlotte Mason, who was a 20th century British education reformer. And so I think that's at least when I first heard of that term, when I was delving into Charlotte Mason and kind of learning about her. But she writes in her book, A Philosophy of Education. I have not read the whole book, okay? I'll just be honest, but I have read parts of it. And she says that we as teachers should train a child, and I'm quoting her, train a child upon many living books, for we know that our business is not to teach him all about anything, but to help him make valid as many as may be of those firstborn affinities that fit our new existence to existing things. Okay, so that was a lot. But I think she quoted William Wordsworth, the poet, when she said the first born affinities that fit our new existence to existing things. I think what she's saying, in other words, is we invite children to make sense of the objective truths in their world and to make those truths come alive to them. And how do we do that? We expose them to a variety of ideas found in well-written books that are, they could pass, if they're nonfiction books, they could pass. If you wanted to learn about mushrooms, you could buy a book that was just like a textbook format on a mushroom and all the varieties of mushrooms. Or you could buy a book that was told in the form of a story, a narrative. And it, living books, generally speaking, they are written by one author who is passionate about his or her topic. And they're written in that narrative form, which is engaging to children. It brings children in. They're usually books that fire the imagination and touch the emotions, and then they spark ideas that can be connected to other ideas. So I love, for example, this book that we've been reading in our homeschool, Mathematicians Are People Too. Have you heard of it, Amy?
Yes, in fact, I have a copy from my own childhood that my kids and I still read.
That's awesome. It's a great one because I think a lot of the time people might consider a living book to be more focused on history or you know, and they forget other disciplines. It's interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary. A living book could be math, it could be science, it could be history, it could be literature, it could be geography. There's so many ways to tie in different subject areas. But I like this book a lot because we, for example, personal story, we were reading about the famous inventor and mathematician Archimedes. And he, if I'm not mistaken, determined that pi was equal to 3.12, blah, 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 blah. And his story was just captivating. It tells of his discoveries and his inventions, but there's also a very poignant part to his story. So the Romans sacked his city of Syracuse, and I wanted to read an excerpt from this book, if you don't mind.
No, please.
Okay, so I'll read it. It's right in front of me too. Unlike his countrymen, Archimedes was not celebrating when the Romans attacked. As usual, he was deeply involved in a problem. He had no idea anything unusual was happening, but he knew someone was standing in the light, making a shadow on the ground where he was drawing his geometric shapes. So I can just, imagine him like really working hard to focus on his problem. And then a Roman soldier comes in and they're sacking his city. Get out of the light, will you? He said. Can't you see I'm working? Rise and follow me, old man, the soldier commanded. Archimedes didn't hear him. He kept working, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. He didn't notice the soldier angrily unsheath his sword. Proud and arrogant, the soldier disobeyed Marcellus's order and killed the greatest creative genius of the ancient world. And the name of that story from this book is The Man Who Concentrated Too Hard. So that excerpt just full of living ideas about honoring the person made in God's image and what it might look like when you let your emotions get in control, or not in control, but out of control in a situation like the anger of that soldier. And he was arrogant, he was proud, he might have wanted to make a name for himself, and he just acted in that way, in that rash way. And so, I mean, there's so many ideas you can talk about when you read a story like that. And that's the power of a living book.
Well, it's no surprise to me hearing just your delight in living books and sharing them with your children. And I know I always see you sharing new book lists and book ideas online as well. It's not really a surprise to me that you wanted to write your own book. And so you have a book coming out, which is a children's biography of one of my very favorite authors, G.K. Chesterton. I am so excited about this. So I have right here, I have my old copy. This is my copy of Orthodoxy from when I was a teenager. I have read it almost every year since. It's filled with my, snarky comments and underlinings, and it's fun to see sort of my growth as a reader as well as I reread my copy. So I am just curious how you first became interested in learning more about Chesterton and then writing about him as well.
Well, I just want to say, Amy, I'm so impressed. You are so much, you're a better reader than I am. I applaud you because I've not gotten to that level of expert where I am reading the same work and like really letting it sink into me. Because I know every time you read something, every new reading of it, you're going to get something different, and it's something that's going to be emphasized each time. So I would say that's really impressive, and I love that. I have aspirations, but I will say I started out learning about G.K. Chesterton probably, I would say it was 2013. So it was a while ago, but I hadn't heard of G.K. Chesterton prior to that point in my life. So I was in my mid to late 20s, and I loved C.S. Lewis. I had read The Great Divorce, The Four Loves, Mere Christianity. I just, well, I know which one order of. I mean, I loved C.S. Lewis, and I thought, well, I need a book right now. I need a book recommendation. So, what better place to go to seek advice than Facebook? So I posted something one day. I was like, does anybody know, have a book recommendation for me? I really like C.S. Lewis, but I'd like, something along that line, something imaginative, sort of imaginative, but I also like nonfiction, something philosophical. And um, an old friend from my campus ministry, she responded and said, "You should read G.K. Chesterton. If you like Lewis, you'll like Chesterton." And she gave me the recommendation she gave me was The Man Who Was Thursday. And I said, "Okay, never heard of that, but sure."
Like
So
maybe one of Chesterton's weirdest books.
yeah, I know. I was like, she didn't mention orthodoxy, she didn't mention heretics, but oh well. So that was my first introduction to Chesterton. And I didn't even read The Man Who Was Thursday because I opened it and I just like, I didn't know how to interpret it. I didn't have much guidance there. I will say since then, I have listened to a wonderful podcast, the Literary Life podcast, uh, with Angelina Stanford and Thomas Banks, and they do a really great job of going through The Man Who Was Thursday. So I will say that helped me out a lot. But early on, I thought it was really confusing, G.K. Chesterton. I thought he was very wordy, which he is. It's very verbose. And he wasn't as easy to read for me as Lewis. But I think, Chesterton came back to me, after that initial introduction. And I won't get into all the details, but I did try to publish a book on the life of Lego founder Ole Kirk Christensen, and actually was working alongside my current publishing company on that book, and it didn't work out. It just didn't work out because Lego has a lot of interesting copyright laws and things like that, and apparently you can't write a biography on the founder of Lego without going through Lego, the Lego group. That's somewhat new. That's like as of 2018, that's a new guideline they have. But anyway, I didn't want to get into all of that. It didn't make sense to pursue that project. So I had to sit on it for a little while, but it just came to me after I mourned a little bit the loss of that project. I just thought, well, I love biography. I know I want to stick with that genre. Who has a compelling story? And it just came to me, G.K. Chesterton. I mean, he was one of the most renowned writers of his day, and I would say arguably one of the best writers of the 20th century. And so he has the, Christian apologetic background, kind of like C.S. Lewis. And I know a lot of people in the world have heard of Lewis, but I feel like Chesterton just wasn't highlighted as much, and for various reasons. So I thought, well, and if you really go down that rabbit hole, you see that C.S. Lewis can connect his conversion to Christianity to G.K. Chesterton's book, The Everlasting Man. After C.S. Lewis read The Everlasting Man, he went from atheist to believer. So I thought that was noteworthy. I was like, well, who is this G.K. Chesterton? Let's get into him a little bit more. So I really do think like through that journey, I became well acquainted with Chesterton. I saw so many valuable nuggets that people, homeschooling moms, people who just love Christian apologetics, people who love good writing and literature, all of those people could get something from G.K. Chesterton. So I became well acquainted with him. I got to know him better by reading his autobiography. I was in a small Eastern North Carolina town. I spent like 2 days just immersing myself in his autobiography. And I listened to another biography I had on audio, and I was constantly pausing the audio to transcribe what I heard, and then, reading the autobiography with my eyeballs late into the night, writing those notes down, color coding the notes to make sure my sources didn't get mixed up. And it was a laborious process, but well worth it. That initial research period was just kind of my first deep dive into Chesterton. So
That is so fun. I love that you were introduced to him. I love that you didn't give up on him after you tried The Man Who Was Thursday, which, as someone who loves Chesterton, I have to say is not my favorite. I actually have read it twice, and both times I was like, this is so weird.
I know it is weird.
But I think Chesterton is really fun and unique because he was so prolific. There really is, he's written on just about every topic. So no matter what you're interested in, science, literature, history, current events, philosophy, fiction, he was a mystery author, right? There's something for everyone. So I
Yeah,
love that.
for sure.
Well,
Yeah.
for anyone else who maybe like you is not super familiar with Chesterton, like you were previously, can you just give us a brief introduction to his life and then his legacy?
Okay, I'll try to make it brief. So I guess you can start with, he was born in 1874, Victorian England. He was born Gilbert Keith Chesterton, GK. That's where we get GK. And he grew up in a home where there was just a lot of wonder and imagination, and his parents were loving parents. He had an older sister named Beatrice, who was 8 when sadly she passed away. He was 3 years old when it happened. So he remembers her, but he doesn't have as big, vivid recollection of her. He has bits and pieces, kind of snapshots of her memory. And so, but later on, they did have a third child, Cecil Chesterton, and he was very close with Cecil. They argued all the time, but he practiced debating with Cecil. He said from the moment Cecil learned to speak. So he has in his autobiography some really good memories of childhood. And I would say it was a rich childhood full of books and imagination. He has a vivid memory of somebody painting a white hobby horse, one of the stick horses, on what is believed to have been his nursery wall. And ironically enough, a white horse would later become the topic of his epic poem, The Ballad of the White Horse. But I'm not saying that was directly connected to that, but the white horse was kind of a recurring image in his memory and in his writing. So he had a very happy childhood overall, aside from his sister's death. And in childhood, I thought this was interesting to all of us homeschooling moms and educators. In childhood, he was given the freedom to explore his interests and all sorts of things that he was curious about. So before he was sent to school, he actually learned his Greek capital letters. This was his own initiative. He did it himself just for fun. And so he loved capital Greek letters, but he said lowercase Greek letters when he was made to learn those later. He said they were like a swarm of gnats. So he had his opinions about this. Mm-hmm. His favorite fairy tale was The Princess and the Goblin by George MacDonald. I have listened to that one. Love it. And I speak more about his interests in the book and how he met his best friend at school and all that to say his childhood imagination really did influence his adulthood imagination. I mean, they're kind of inextricably connected, seamless. He was very imaginative. He was known for his wit, his wisdom. He went to a school where the students were encouraged to pursue their own interests. But sometimes his genius went unnoticed by teachers because he was kind of spacey. As you may imagine, I don't know. Just I feel like with that kind of genius, you kind of have to have a bit of spaciness too. So, but he was committed to good cheer and happiness, and he had a solid group of friends. They formed a debate club on their own. And so it was really neat to read about that as I was researching. His dad had a lot of hobbies. His father was, I think he was like a real estate broker or something by day, but at nighttime or, in his free time, he made time for literature and making toy theaters. And he was a really good artist. He sketched a lot. And G.K. Chesterton inherited some of those traits from his dad. So it didn't come as a huge surprise that he went off to art school. He was really good at drawing, but at that same time, he was away from his family, he was away from his friends, he was like further down the river, or upriver from his neighborhood, his London familiarity. And he experienced a period of confusion. And I talk about this in the book a little bit, talking about his kind of exposure to those postmodern secular ideas that a lot of his teachers were promoting in art school. And these ideas really troubled Gilbert a lot and got to him. And you can read a little bit more about that, but he kept notebooks, and some of his notebooks were just filled with really bad, grotesque drawings. And he said he went through what he called the darkest depths of contemporary pessimism, like ideas from Nietzsche, like nihilism, that life is meaningless. And then he was struggling with a lot of intrusive thoughts. And so that was a hard period of life for him. But the Lord, he had a plan for him. He had a plan for Gilbert. And what really happened next was, overall, to summarize, he went from despair to gratitude. He was reminded of something his grandfather had said. His grandfather was a believer, and he had to hang on to that truth. It was about gratitude and just being grateful that he was created. And he went from gratitude to love, and he came to understand that the only one who could save him from himself and his sin was Christ. And he had gone from unbelief to belief. He started reading his Bible. He understood, as he describes Christ, the man with the golden key who unlocked the answer to the riddle of life and unlocked his soul. And so that period transitioned him. His notebooks that were once filled with horrible things were now filled with gratitude, and belief and biblical truth. And he believed strongly that the only thing that could actually be proved was original sin. So he held to that doctrine that we are sinners from birth. We are inherently sinful. And this truth, is the bad news. But then we have the good news of the gospel that Christ saved us from our sin and gives us a new heart, a new life. So he lived in that, and he was growing, and he met his sweetheart, Frances, and ended up marrying her. He published, his first published work was in 1900. It was a collection of poems called Graybeards at Play, and he illustrated all of that himself. After getting married in 1901, he went on to write some more, and then by 1902, he was becoming famous as an essayist. People were starting to talk more about him. Even in America, they were starting to talk about G.K. Chesterton. He also wrote an imaginative novel called The Napoleon of Notting Hill, and it was about defending one's tradition and beliefs. So he was very much a man of tradition. He liked to call it Little England, the way things were. He loved King Alfred of the early Middle Ages. And so he really liked to hold to these traditional beliefs and values. And he wrote Heretics, which was his first work that addressed postmodern thinking and faulty thinking, not just in postmodern times, but it came from his interaction with those ideas, back in art school. So this was his way to express the need to believe in absolute truth. And then later, this prompted Gilbert to write about doctrine and defend right thinking. And so that's the book Orthodoxy that came as kind of a response to Heretics. He was urged to write his own thinking about, well, what is right thinking, Gilbert? Keith Chesterton, why don't you tell us? And he said, okay, I should answer that question. And that was the book Orthodoxy. So without Chesterton, you could say C.S. Lewis would not have read The Everlasting Man, which did lead to his conversion. Without Chesterton, we wouldn't have affectionately named a Prince of Paradox. That was his nickname, the Prince of Paradox, because he was known for that writing style of comparing two things that were similar yet different at the same time. And then without Chesterton, the secular views of the 20th century would not have been challenged nearly as much. He challenged opinions, but he did it in a very respectful way. Without Chesterton, we would not have the Ballad of the White Horse. C.S. Lewis once asked, "Don't you like the way Chesterton takes hold of you in the Ballad of the White Horse, shakes you and makes you want to cry?" He loves the Ballad of the White Horse. And I think Winston Churchill later on quoted in one of his famous speeches part of the Ballad of the White Horse as well. And without the Chestertons, Francis and Gilbert, 25 children would have been without godparents. They would have had to find different godparents. So they had 25 godchildren. His lifelong friend wrote about Chesterton after he died. He said, "He was a giant of English letters, and he's been taken from us. With Gilbert Chesterton gone, the world can never be the same again." So apparently he just impacted so many people.
There were so many stories in there that I didn't know about his life. It makes me really eager to read your biography of him. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about his wife, Frances, because I think my listeners who are Charlotte Mason mamas especially might be intrigued by her background.
Okay, so Frances, I learned a lot about Frances in this book, The Woman Who is Chesterton by Nancy Carpenter Brown. And I also have a biography by Maisie Ward, who she included a lot of Frances's correspondence and Gilbert's correspondence to one another, and a lot of anecdotes and things like that. So I really found Frances Chesterton very interesting. She was born in, she lived in London as well. She lived in a more bohemian neighborhood than Gilbert growing up, like more artsy. But she was born Frances Blogg, like a blog post, but double G on the end. Some fun facts about Frances. Okay, so she and her sister were among the first students to attend the first kindergarten in Great Britain, because the Germans had brought it over to Britain at that point. And so she went to kindergarten. She worked at, now this is the part that might appeal to the Charlotte Mason folks out there. She worked at the Parents National Education Union under Charlotte Mason's direction, and she was a secretary. In fact, all of the Blogg sisters were secretaries at some point or another in their lives. She and Gilbert had a long engagement. So they met actually at her parents' home. And that's a fascinating story too. You'll have to read about that. But they met each other, and they had a very long engagement because Gilbert had to earn enough money to become someone who could marry. Essentially, he had to work. He had to keep working for a while. So I think they met in, it was 1895 or 1896, and they ended up getting married in 1901. So it was a pretty long courtship and then engagement, but he was not earning very much as a young journalist. And at the beginning of their courtship, about, it said 25 shillings a week. And I tried to do some like conversion on that. I don't know if I got it right, but it was something like 2.5 days of wages based on what I came up with. I don't know if that's 100% correct, but he wasn't earning a lot, all that to say. But Frances loved Charlotte Mason. So she was working as a secretary for a while. And during this time at the PNEU, she composed essays, she reviewed books, she edited articles for 2 of the publications there at the PNEU. And she debated at educational meetings and gave speeches. She was a very intelligent, wise woman. And she's described as having this quiet intelligence and quiet composure about her. She and Gilbert, they kind of ran in the same social circles, and they even, so Frances and her siblings had this other debate club. So Gilbert had been in a debate club growing up in his young adulthood. with some friends. Well, Frances also, I guess it was a common thing that at that time, during that day, to have these debate clubs. So she and her friends, neighbors, siblings formed a debate club, and it was called the I Don't Know Club. And Gilbert joined that when they started their courtship. And they were quite romantic. They wrote notes to each other, and Frances would press flowers into her books, and then she would later give the flowers to Gilbert. So if you want to read more about their wedding, I describe that in a lot of detail in the book. There are some humorous instances that happened, anecdotes about that day, but I don't want to give them away. So that's kind of a teaser there, but not everything was just roses and rainbows and butterflies. They experienced a lot of heartache early on. For example, one thing that happened, Frances's sister, Gertrude, had a horrible accident. She was riding a bicycle and she was hit by an omnibus and just died. So she had that going on, had to grieve her sister's death, and she didn't grieve without hope. She was a believer, but it was just very hard. And they also, another thing that added to their suffering was they couldn't have children, even though they wanted children. She couldn't get pregnant. She went through some surgeries. It didn't happen. So, but instead of feeling sorry for herself, and instead of, kind of staying there in that grief, they decided they would be godparents, and also welcome people in to their home a lot. They were very hospitable. They had big parties that were designated children-only parties. They had a lot of things going on around Christmas time in their neighborhood, just welcomed families in, and they were very involved in the lives of their nieces and nephews. So I thought that was a really neat thing about them, and how they poured into other people, and they didn't just wallow in their sadness. I mean, they wanted children, but it was one of those things where they couldn't change it. So where they were, where God had them in their life and in their station, they just used that to glorify him. So also Frances later on had to mourn the death of her brother. So they definitely were not strangers to suffering. She possessed a lot of faith, and she leaned into the Lord during these hard times. And also Gilbert, one winter, he got really sick, and the doctors thought it had to do with his heart. And he was in bed for like 3 or 4 months. He was as was the medical advice of the day, they had him in a comatose state part of that time. So she had to just be patient, and wait on the Lord to heal him. And he did get up. He did start walking around, and was back on his feet around Easter time. So, that's kind of neat too. It was right around Easter when we celebrate Christ's resurrection. It's kind of neat how she was able to see the answer to so many prayers, and just it was good. But she had to wait during that time and hope and pray. Frances had many hobbies, like gardening and writing poetry. She cared for animals. She arranged bouquets. She had heart for people. She served the needy. And she loved the Lord, and she was a faithful wife to Gilbert. So she also, fun fact, kept him from getting lost many times, told him where he needed to be when he couldn't remember, or, he had so much on his mind with his writing. He just kind of floated through life, maybe not really having a full awareness sometimes of where he needed to be next. He didn't like to hold to schedules as much as maybe some people would. And she was more of that person. She managed the finances for a while. She told him where he needed to be. She had a place in the house like designated for his things and important notes that he needed to remember. And she had like some kind of placard or sign in the home that said, "Lest we forget." So it was just very much, it was humorous to read about how she complimented him. But I love learning about Frances Chesterton.
It sounds like she was just the right helper that he needed. That's really great.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
Holly, as we wrap up talking about Chesterton's life, was there anything that surprised you as you read either about him or read his works, or any favorite quotes that you have?
I loved reading. I was taking a little course last summer on the Ballad of the White Horse to familiarize myself with that. And I loved reading about how Chesterton just really had an affinity for medieval tradition. And he knew so much history. So I was kind of, I just kept on discovering more and more fascinating, like metaphors and allusions and imagery that he included in that poem. He had a love of King Alfred of Wessex, and he just would talk about in that poem, of course, it's about Alfred defeating the Norse invaders that come to Britain back in like the 800s, so the 9th century. And so it was almost like taking a history course. He was brilliant. And the cool thing about Chesterton was he liked to travel to some of the places that he would write about. So he and Francis went to the area where Alfred fought the battle against Guthrum, the Viking invader and his men. And it was called the Battle of Edington. And then he also went to this area not too far from Edington called Uffington, where they have, if you go there, you will see on a hillside. It's a beautiful green hillside. Look it up on Wikipedia or wherever. Just Google the White Horse of Uffington. There is a white horse that nobody knows exactly how it got there, but people believe that the people that lived there centuries ago scored the earth and like carved off the soil in the top layer to expose the white chalky limestone underneath, and it's in the shape of a horse. So yeah, and so he went there, he saw it with his own eyes. He was inspired to write the Ballad of the White Horse about the Battle of Edington and about King Alfred. And it was just really brilliant how he wove all those pieces together. And he also writes in his collection of short essays. There is one essay called A Piece of Chalk. He also writes about how England, or that part of England, southern England, is metaphorically and literally a piece of chalk because it is on that chalky limestone. That is the land. And in addition, he was comparing the chalk from that land to the industriousness, the ingenuity, and the creativity of the people who lives there. And so it's a great piece, pun intended, great piece. I recommend that one. So yeah, I just kept becoming more and more surprised and intrigued by his love for that area of England and all the like imagery that is wrapped up in those places. And I have a favorite Chesterton quote. You asked about Chesterton quote.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the one I've always liked is around gratitude, and he actually wrote it in one of his notebooks after he emerged from that dark period of art school, when he started to see how God, was providing for him in so many ways, and how Christ was really at the center of everything. He said, and you've probably heard this quote before, "You say grace before meals, all right, but I say grace before the play and the opera, and grace before the concert and the pantomime, and grace before I open a book, and grace before sketching, painting, swimming, fencing, boxing, walking, playing, dancing, and grace before I dip the pen in the ink." And I mean, I can't even imagine him doing all those things like swimming, fencing, boxing, walking, but the gist of it is, right, that no matter what, God is always there. He's omnipresent. We can always come to him in prayer. And we can thank him all the time because he's a good God. And so I love it. And I love how he expresses that. I don't think I could ever express anything quite like that.
Chesterton has this amazing sense of wonder and delight, I think, in everything I have read from him. This ability to see the world in a childlike way and not in a way where it's an immature. It's actually the maturity of childhood to see things as they truly are and to rejoice in that. Um, and to see the Lord's hand at work. I just think that's one of his real gifts that he brings to every topic he discusses.
Yes, I know. And it's kind of a paradox too. Like he's childlike, but he's so, like you said, to see things as they really are. He's wise in that childlikeness. I think that's such a neat thing that you pointed out.
Well, if you were talking to a teen or adult who wanted to start reading with Chesterton, which one of his books or works would you encourage them to start with?
Well, I admit I have not read every single one of his works, but I have read a lot of his short essays and stories, and I have read a couple of his longer works, aside from his autobiography. I would recommend, if you're wanting to start with something a little lighter, Tremendous Trifles is a collection of short essays and short stories. It's so clever. It's like taking G.K. Chesterton and putting him into like a capsule. It's very concentrated G.K. Chesterton. You get the full benefit of G.K. Chesterton, but it's not like eating a 5-course meal. You're just having your multivitamin of G.K. Chesterton. If I had to compare it to that, it's just so good. I like A Piece of Chalk is in there. Tremendous Trifles is another. And then there was one, I just like, you could pick any of them and you'd probably be surprised that some of them, they're all so different. In Topsy Turvy Land is another one. And yeah, I would recommend that one if you want something a little lighter. And then if you're looking for something like more comprehensive, I would go with The Everlasting Man, because, I'm listening to it right now. And it's just like, I would say, it's like he explains how Christianity is the answer, okay, in The Everlasting Man. It's not something that has just survived after having apparently been defeated by various conquests and persecutions and all of that. It has thrived and it's died many times and risen again. For this is quoting Chesterton, for it had a God who knew the way out of the grave. And so I like The Everlasting Man because it's an overview of history from like antiquity to Chesterton's modern times. And it goes through how at our core, like religion is something that all people kind of inherently have. But the question is, who are you going to worship? And it's not like we can deny this impulse to worship something and to know that God is real. You can't deny that. But he goes so much more eloquently into like how Christ is the man with the golden key who unlocks the answer to the riddle of life. And so I think that's a really good one if you want. And C.S. Lewis read it and later became a Christian. So I think that's worth noting.
If C.S. Lewis loved it, I mean, who are we to say no?
Right.
Well, if children or families are wanting to learn more about Chesterton, of course, they can start with your children's biography, The Life of Chesterton. So can you just tell us a little bit about your book and where people can find that?
Okay. It's an amazing book. No, no, no. In all seriousness, though, I really wanted this book originally to be a children's picture book biography. And it was going to be like a children's open the pages, look at the pictures, and just have a little bit of text on each page. That was back in 2021. But the idea was revised and reworked. Blue Sky Daisies publishing, they've been wonderful to work with, and they had that vision for a middle grades chapter book biography with pen and ink drawings. And after they cast the vision, I could see it, I could get on board with it, but I was still nervous about writing a chapter book. I didn't want to make a mistake in the research process. I mean, there's so much that is important. You have to get the right sources the first time. And that can be tricky, you know? So, you know, it was a lot of hard work, but they were wonderful to work with. And I'm a first timer. I needed some editing help. They were wonderful, Amy and Tina at Blue Sky Daisies. So I believe that the project has been made so much better than the initial idea. And also, we found a wonderful illustrator. I think that can also make a project what, you know, it helps it rise to its full potential. We had a great illustrator in Nellie Buchanan. And if you haven't found her yet, I would recommend following her. Her handle on Instagram is illustrations_by_Nellie, which is Nellie. She added so much beauty to the project. I would say her style is more like vintage and kind of like a nostalgic style. You think like early 20th century, kind of like Norman Rockwell inspired. So that was really, really neat to find her work and to have her be a part of the project. So yeah, she hides a few Easter eggs in her illustrations, not like literal Easter eggs, but like she hides a few things that you might find interesting. One of them, there's a sketch of G.K. Chesterton in his childhood library. And if you look carefully at the book's spines in the library, you'll see one with my name on it, which I thought was really clever. But yeah, she's amazing. I would actually love to have her do some art. In fact, I did ask her to do a sketch of my 3 children. And she's going to do like a Norman Rockwell style sketch with their 3 profiles kind of put together. I'll have to show you once I get it from her. I'm really excited about that. But the name of the book, the title of the book is The Life of Chesterton, the man who carried a sword stick and a pen. And you think about what he did. He liked to defend the truth. So you think about a sword stick in medieval times, you know, being used to kind of defend, but he would just use it to point to things and pontificate and make gestures. But he would actually carry a sword stick around with him. And a pen, of course, he was using that kind of as a weapon for truth. And so the book itself is about 115 pages long, and it's written for middle grades. And I would describe it as a primer to G.K. Chesterton's life and writing. You know, I'm a homeschool mom. I'm not any high-level expert on Chesterton, but this whole process has helped me become more well-versed in Chesterton, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity. So I'm really excited about just the book and introducing people to Chesterton.
I feel like you're this person who found this interesting man, this interesting life, these interesting books, and you got excited about them. And now you're like, come on, everyone, come. I want you to learn and be as excited as I am too, which I think
Yes.
going back to our original discussion about living books, like that's what you want from an author. You want someone who's like, oh, I'm so excited. Let me share this beautiful story with you. So I cannot wait personally to read your book. And I'm going to have to make you sign me a copy.
I will do that for you, Amy.
Oh, thanks.
I really wish I had a time machine that I could go back and travel in time. I really would love to meet him. I just, you know, it's kind of a shame. Like you get so connected to a person by reading their work and by learning about them, but it kind of leaves you wanting, like, I wish I actually had this like friendship with this person, you know? So that's how I feel about Chesterton.
A wonderful person to meet one day in heaven.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Well, Holly, here at the end, I'm going to ask you the questions I'm asking all of my guests in this upcoming season. And so the first is just, what are you personally reading lately?
Well, right now I'm reading Maisie Ward's biography on G.K. Chesterton, and that's for my own edification and trying to, you know, get to know him even better through that. And I'm also reading this book by your audience probably has a few Sally Clarkson fans. Are you familiar with Sally Clarkson?
Yes.
Yes. Her daughter, Joy Marie Clarkson, wrote a book not too long ago. It came out, I think, in February. It's called You Are a Tree and Other Metaphors to Nourish Thought, Life, and Prayer. And that's been good. Talking about like the different metaphors, like light as wisdom, life as a journey, love as a disease, like all these kind of like experiences that humanity has had from like the very beginning of history, because humanity keeps relating these things together, putting them together. And I think it's a good study of metaphor, but it's also just a good study on like what it is to be human. So I really like it.
The second question I'm asking all my guests this season is, what is your best tip for dealing with a homeschool day or season that seems to just be going totally wrong?
Yeah, so I've had a few of those. I feel like a lot of the time we react, right, to situations. And I think that some things that have helped me to try to remember at least is the relationship comes first, okay? No matter what you're doing. I know sometimes it seems like math, everything is at stake and have to get through this and all, but honestly, like taking time to admit your own wrongdoing, it packs a lot of punch, I think, in a good way. Admitting your own wrongdoing in a situation when things might be going haywire, and reconciling with that person. Hugging helps. I mean, scientifically, brain science, it helps to hug somebody, just feels better. And then like remembering scripture and saying it back to yourself and the other person, whether it's a child. I mean, usually it's a child, right? If you're in homeschool. So like just reminding yourself like God's with us right now. And if there's a scripture you can pull out of your mind, like for me, I like the scripture from Zephaniah 3:17. The Lord your God is mighty to save. He will take great delight in you. He will rejoice over you with singing. He will quiet you with his love, or something to that effect. He will quiet you with his love. He will rejoice over you with singing. He's with you. He's mighty to save. Like he's with you right now in this moment. It's really hard, but he's still with you. And then just like as a preemptive measure to try to offset the hard days, like just think about like the sweet times you have together and maybe like go outside of your space a little bit, maybe like go to a park, even if it means like stopping the lesson. I know that sounds really hard for a lot of us, myself included, but like going to a place where you can clear your mind a little bit or get back on the connection train with your child, even with a fun book or a joke book. I found that joke books for us, that's been like therapy in some ways because they connect people together and it kind of resets your mind a little bit. So I think that you have permission to read joke books too.
Those are wonderful tips. And I will say, yes, with the jokes, especially this past year, my youngest son going through his treatment for cancer, jokes have been a wonderful way to just bring a little bit of laughter and relief to really tricky situations. So if they can work in the hospital, I think they can definitely work during a math lesson.
Yes. Perspective. Yes,
Yeah.
for sure. Mm-hmm.
Holly, where can people find you all around the internet?
You can go to my website, which is mylittlebrittschoolhouse.com. But I'm also in various places, like if you go to blueskydaisies.net, that website has wonderful just visuals of the different books that they've published. And I'm on there now, but they have, if you're familiar with Cindy Rollins, and then there's a Charlotte Mason biography that Lanaya Gore and Twyla Farmer wrote and illustrated together. I mean, they're just wonderful. It's a good website. I would go there. And then I'm on like all the little social media outlets like Facebook and Instagram under My Little Brick Schoolhouse. If you want to join my private Facebook group, it's Read with My Little Brick Schoolhouse.
And I will make
I'd
sure
to see you.
Oh, yeah. And I will make sure to have all of the links to those places in the show notes for this episode. And I actually have interviewed Amy from Blue Sky Daisies before. I've interviewed Cindy
Yes.
Rollins. I interviewed Linnea and Twyla as well. So I will put those links in the show notes for listeners who want to hear more good stuff about the books from Blue Sky Daisies. But if I can just ask also our listeners today, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. Share it with a friend who loves beautiful stories, who loves G.K. Chesterton. And take a minute to leave a rating and review for Homeschool Conversations with Humility and Doxology in your podcast app. It really does help other homeschool parents find the podcast, and it means a lot to me as well. So I will have all the show notes for this episode at humilityanddoxology.com. And Holly, I am so excited for you. Congratulations. I have just loved being with you over the past few years as you've worked on this project, and I know it is going to be such a beautiful gift to many families. So, and thanks for coming on today. It was great.
Oh, Amy, thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you for being a friend for the past few years. You've seen me through a lot of times, and I value our friendship.
Well, until next time, everyone, happy homeschooling.